general vicinity. The exact site still is not known. There are theories. One earlier theory from the 30s and 40s was that because of erosion, 100 yards or so of shoreline had been lost in this area, and all the fort site was probably under the river. Today, the current theory is that probably part of the fort may be under the riverbed, but part of it is still probably back up here on the land area. And they hope to find some remnant of that in the current archaeology dig that's starting this year, back up near the brick church, and they'll be working their way down in this direction. At the end of the town site, about another 200-300 yards on down Junior Street, marked by a wooden cross, third ridge, also marking the ruins of the 3rd and 4th State House. It was that State House that was burned in 1676 during Bacon's Rebellion. Again, probably accidentally in 1698 when they finally moved the capital out of this area here. The cross marks a mass grave that was found in the 1950s. They believe it marks the victims of the starving time, the winter of 1609 and 10, when only 60 survivors of the colony made it through that winter, although it isn't known for sure. But when the two larger ships, the Susan Constant and the Godspeed, went back to England, they left 104 settlers here in June. By September, half of those had already died. Over 50 died the first 2 months here in July and August. Only 38 survived till January, 6 months later, when the first relief ships with more food and more settlers returned here. It seems the long voyages, diseases they brought with them, hardships, would wear their resistance down. Hard work and weather here would take their toll. The earliest settlers were people related to the Virginia Company, investors, wealthy people, gentlemen, gentry. They wouldn't work here in the wilderness at manual labor, and that created a definite problem. They're 3,000 miles away from England, but they're bringing those same social customs over here to the wilderness. Captain John Smith, who took over the colony in 1608, helped the situation a little bit by his edict of, if you don't work, you don't eat. Because although this was a money-making operation here, they wanted to start industries to create items they could sell back in England. They were eating communally out of a common kettle, if you will, for a number of years before they became more self-sufficient. After the winter of 1609 and 10, they started sending the lowest of the social classes over here. In the large cities, many people had migrated from the countryside because of the enclosures, no work. They didn't find work there either, so many of them would turn to petty crime for support. So England was certainly willing to rid itself of this social problem, and the Virginia Company needed them over here because of the high death rate. But that created a problem here because although King James had signed a charter to them guaranteeing them the rights of Englishmen here as if they were living in England, it didn't work out in actual fact. So they did away with the charter, declared martial law in 1610, and for the next 8 years they ran the colony here under martial law. It was called laws divine, moral, and martial. They had very severe punishments and executions for infraction of these laws. They would, in some instances, take away your rations for a day, for a minor offense for a week, for more serious ones, to whip you in addition to taking away your rations, nailing your ears to a tree, maybe pulling out the nail and maybe cutting off your ear and leaving it nailed to the tree, perhaps some soot for the birds to eat, puncturing your tongue with a sharp implement called a bodkin, which is like an awl or a sharpened nail, and executions might be hanging, shooting, chaining you to a tree and starving you to death. These sound like very extreme measures, and they were, but they felt they were necessary to regain control of the colony. And they did regain control of the colony with these measures. It was shape up or else. The helicopter was lost its flight, whatever. Yeah, looking for submarines here. But things will shape up a little bit with a settler named John Roth getting some Spanish tobacco seeds brought here on a ship from the West Indies, growing an experimental crop of this tobacco in 1613. After they harvested it, dried it, and smoked it, they thought it tasted pretty good, a lot better than the indigenous variety cultivated by the Indians in this area. They sent the remainder back to London. They smoked it there, thought it was good tobacco, So finally, they have found a way that they'll be making some money here in the Virginia colony. So now they will have a market for indentured servants, young males with no jobs in England, to ship them over here. They'll need land, however, so they'll move the Indians a little farther out, and they'll create settlements up and down this river for about 100 miles, from about where Richmond is today, all the way down to the mouth across the Chesapeake Bay, what's called the Eastern Shore. They will eventually have 11 incorporated settlements there. And the following year, 1614, this same John Rolfe did his second great service to the colony by marrying Pocahontas, the daughter of Chief Powhatan, who ruled the Indian Empire in this area. From 1609 to 1614, they had been at war pretty much. So now we have what's called the Peace of Pocahontas, peace with the Indians. So with tobacco and peace with the Indians, economic stability will bring on political stability. The people in the Virginia Company back in London really don't like the idea of martial law here, although they felt it was necessary. So some movements are afoot to loosen up a little bit and restore English liberties promised them in their charter. So in 1618, a new governor was appointed. His name was George Yardley. He will have a commission to create a general assembly here like the Parliament in England. He will arrive here in April of 1619. After his arrival, elections are held in these 11 incorporated settlements all up and down the James River. And these representatives, called burgesses, will come here to Jamestown in July of 1619 to hold their first assembly, and the largest building is the church, and they will hold it there. If you look at this bronze plaque over here in this little brick pavilion, you will see what was described by Captain John Smith as the first church here at Jamestown. They said it was a rotten old sail stretched between the tree boughs for shelter from the rain and the sun. Reverend Robert Hunt, the Anglican minister who came over, held his first church services here. He used logs for an altar, and the men knelt on the ground to receive their communion. This will be followed by a wooden structure in the fort as soon as it was built. And since we'll be walking up to the church where the first assembly was held, let's head on up there at this time. Reconstruction of the 1640s brick church. From that sale, we would go to a wooden church in the fort. That one would last perhaps 10 years. In 1617, they would build another wooden church. That particular church, the 1617 church, was built here. Those foundations are under the glass on each side. They're cobblestone, and you can see a portion of them through there. This church would last about 20 years, and in 1639 they would start a brick church. That would be finished a number of years later. It would last. It also was burned during Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. It was gutted. The brick still stood. It was repaired and lasted until the middle of the next century when the parish was moved and the church eventually fell into ruin and pretty much was obliterated until they dug behind the tower in 1901, uncovered the foundations of both churches, and rebuilt this one in 1907. But it was in this wooden church in 1619 that the first assembly would meet when they got here to Jamestown. Before we get to the assembly, let's go back to 1606 in England when the Virginia Company drew up their charter that King James signed. I'd like to share with you a small portion of it dealing with English liberties brought here. Also, we do for us, our heirs and successors, declare by these presents that all and every, the persons being our subjects which shall dwell and inhabit within every or any of the said several colonies and plantations, and every of their children which shall happen to be born within the limits and precincts of the said several colonies and plantations, shall have and enjoy all liberties, franchises, and immunities within any of our other dominions to all intents and purposes, as if they had been abiding and born within this our realm of England or any other of our said dominions. So shall have and enjoy all liberties. And this is very important because this is a contract between the Crown and the settlers, and they will take these contracts very seriously. After Jamestown, there will be other colonies established in the 17th century. They too will have charters they will bring here. They will have those liberties, and they will take them very seriously. In fact, in the next century, when their descendants, still these English Americans, feel that England isn't taking these liberties very seriously. They're being denied them. They talk about their ancestors and these charters that were given to them. They will result in a Stamp Act Congress, a Continental Congress, a Declaration of Independence, and finally going their own way. And it's kind of ironic that they would have to separate from the mother country to get the liberties promised them in the previous century. Now, where do these liberties come from? They go back to the Magna Carta of 1215. A group of nobles would force King John to grant them some concessions, and these concessions would be written down. Some of those in different forms are incorporated into the American Constitution. Some of them were trial by jury, the due process of law, the right not to be taxed except by their own consent, the freedoms of the church. And over the next few centuries, the common law would develop, a parliament would develop in England, and this parliament will have three branches: the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and the King. The assembly here in the New World will have a council of the state, the General Assembly, or burgesses, and the governor. And again, it's kind of a balance of powers, as our Constitution will have also. But unfortunately, also in the 17th century in England, there will be again a struggle for liberty, as there had been in the 13th. This same King James, who granted the charter, is the first of the Stuart lines, and he doesn't believe that, starting from the Magna Carta, the rule that the kings are below the law applied to him. He felt that the kings had divine rights. A few years later, he will start the persecution of the Puritans. The Mayflower will sail under the auspices of the Virginia Company, land a little farther north than here. But all of these succeeding colonies, again, will bring with them their charters, Magna Carta, and the laws, and they will be realized with this first assembly here at Jamestown. And I'd like to also quote you a short history written contemporary of the time about the assembly meeting here from July the 30th through August the 4th, 1619. The most convenient place we could find to sit in was the choir of the church, where Sir George Yarley, the governor, being set down in his accustomed place, those of the council of the state sat next to him on both hands, except only the secretary, then appointed speaker, who sat right before him, John Twine, clerk of the General Assembly, being placed next to the speaker, and Thomas Pierce, the sergeant, standing at the bar to be ready for any service the assembly should command him. This is a very important sentence here. But for as much as men's affairs do little prosper where God's service is neglected, all the burgesses took their places in the choir till a prayer was said by Mr. Buck, the minister, that it would please God to guide and sanctify all our proceedings to his own glory and the good of this plantation. The choir would have been over here, and the burgesses would have met here until after the prayer, and they would have passed down through the bar and again back here. And according to the records, it was a very hot weather-wise session. 2 days later, one of the assemblymen died from heat exhaustion, and because of the heat, they would disassemble on August the 4th after only 6 days. The laws that they passed pertain to them here. They would talk about Indians and the relations with them, the relationships of servants to masters, the price of tobacco, the rotation of crops, actually where they should sell dogs to the Indians or not, and things, again, that would concern them here. But these were laws. These laws would be incorporated, and again, they're based on the English laws and the common law, and this is where it would begin. Coming back to Virginia, in the succession of months after World War II ended, Winston Churchill came and addressed the Virginia Assembly. This is the oldest legislative assembly in the New World. And in this speech, he talked about the story of American liberties and English liberties, how much they were alike, how much they had struggled to get them. And still, the story goes on today. It's still current. When we vote, we really have something in common with those nobles in Runnymede, the burgesses at Jamestown, and the patriots at Yorktown. And this, again, is where it was realized here at the little church in Jamestown. If you folks have any particular questions, I'll try to answer them for you as you leave. One thing of note is that over here is a tomb We don't know the identity because the brass inlay has been taken out at some point in history, but they think it's Sir George Yardley, the knight and governor who convened the first assembly on this spot, and if it is, it's a very fitting resting place for Sir George to kind of oversee where liberty really began here in the New World. Thanks for coming out, and again, enjoy the rest of your visit here at Jamestown today.
Great.
By 1614, carpenters laboring with saws and hammers constructed warehouses, 2 rows of private homes, and a governor's mansion. Failing to find gold, silver, and precious stones, as the Spaniards had in Central and South America, the settlers sought other sources of wealth. As tobacco proved lucrative, the yellow weed was fought and beyond. By 1614, carpenters laboring with saws and hammers constructed warehouses, 2 rows of private homes,